More than $3.5 million in the hole. Mayor Tiffany Henyard is accused of misusing money, and today, she's nowhere to be found.
I've never seen any municipality have so many credit cards out there. Orders going out to eat. It is mind-boggling.
Well, you don't answer questions. There's something to count here.
Tiffany Henyard's public persona had always been one of confidence and strength. She appeared carefree and capable, but as panic began to grip the community, more and more people started to turn against her. In a shocking twist, one of Henyard's former trusted aides came forward to expose the depth of the corruption and questionable behavior that had been occurring under her leadership. This revelation left the community horrified, as it uncovered a network of unethical actions that had been going on behind closed doors. The drama surrounding Henyard's death began to intensify, especially with the continued emergence of new details that only complicated her already fragile situation. Henyard had once been seen as the head of a political empire that seemed unstoppable, especially with strong figures like 10M and Dalton helping to hold everything together. However, this empire quickly collapsed, and with it, Henyard's reputation crumbled. Despite her external image as a superwoman, the truth about her actions began to unravel. Carmen Caro, a once trusted member of Henyard's team, contributed to Henyard's downfall when she shared the shocking truth. Caro, who had remained silent for years, decided to speak out after witnessing a pattern of unethical behavior that she could no longer ignore. Caro exposed Henyard for using predatory tactics to consolidate power, accusing her of manipulating residents, employees, and vendors to maintain her political reign. Caro revealed that Henyard had fabricated a false sense of success, financed by taxpayer money. While living extravagantly and making questionable financial decisions, Caro explained that she had kept quiet for so long because she trusted Henyard and didn't want to cause harm. However, after seeing the growing pattern of misconduct, Caro felt she had no choice but to expose the truth. She spoke publicly, stating that she was not doing it for personal gain, but for those who had suffered under Henyard's leadership. Her statements only added fuel to the fire, as Henyard tried to deflect responsibility during a public speech. Instead of addressing the growing concerns, Henyard attempted to shift the blame elsewhere, but her defense only served to highlight how dire the situation had become. The community was shocked by Caro's sudden willingness to speak out, and Henyard's attempts to discredit her backfired. Caro had finally reached her breaking point, and the more she revealed, the clearer it became that Henyard had been involved in numerous unethical actions. Henyard's ability to control the narrative was slipping, and public frustration began to grow as the pressure mounted. Chris Gonzalez, a trustee who had been vocal for months about Henyard's financial misconduct, continued to demand transparency. He pushed for the release of financial records and questioned Henyard's growing list of questionable spending habits. Gonzalez's persistence eventually led to a contentious board meeting dominated by discussions of financial mismanagement. The board began preparing to propose new laws to combat corruption, including restrictions on travel expenses and measures to ensure greater accountability. During this heated debate, it became clear that opposition to Henyard's leadership had grown into a movement for public accountability. However, the most surprising move came when Gonzalez nominated Henyard for a crucial board position, despite the mounting evidence against her. This seemed an odd decision given the tense atmosphere, but it was revealed that Henyard had applied for the position earlier in the year. Gonzalez's nomination came just minutes before the midnight deadline, sending a clear message that Henyard's once unstoppable financial power was now at risk of coming to an end. Although Henyard was still appointed to the position by a slim vote, the decision did little to slow the growing tide of opposition against her. In fact, it only highlighted the divisions within the township and the erosion of Henyard's once solid support base. The appointment, made under such turbulent circumstances, revealed just how fractured the community had become. What had once been a tight-knit group of allies was now splintering under the weight of Henyard's corruption. As the revelations continued to surface, Henyard's political empire quickly began to crumble. Her once powerful position was eroding, and it became increasingly difficult for her to hold on to her authority. Former allies like Caro and Gonzalez had turned against her, and their public denunciations painted a picture of a leader who had lost touch with the people she had sworn to serve. The more people came forward to share their stories of being manipulated by Henyard, the more the community's distrust grew. Tensions remained high as the township anticipated the next shocking development in the ongoing scandal. Henyard's fall from grace had been swift and dramatic, but the drama was far from over. With each passing day, it became more evident that the once powerful mayor would soon face the full consequences of her actions. The allegations of financial misconduct and unethical behavior were not just a matter of political rivalry. They were matters of public trust and accountability. Henyard's refusal to take responsibility for her actions had only intensified the backlash, and the growing public disillusionment with her leadership was undeniable in the midst of all this turmoil. Henyard's political career continued to spiral downward. Her efforts to maintain control through manipulation and deception were increasingly ineffective, and she found herself isolated from former supporters and allies. The walls of her political empire had begun to close in, and it was clear that the once dominant figure in local politics was on the verge of losing everything as Henyard's reign came to an end. The community began to rebuild and heal from the damage caused by her leadership. The fallout from her actions would likely be felt for years to come, and the lessons learned from this scandal would shape the future of the township for generations. The drama surrounding Henyard's downfall was far from over, but one thing was clear. Her grip on power had finally been broken, and the truth had won out.
Jordan Township Supervisor, how do you feel right now?
Oh man, I'm overjoyed. I see this is coming. I love it. That means that I am truly blessed.
Tiffany Henyard's nomination for a crucial role by the Dalton Township Board of Trustees set off a wave of controversy and unrest throughout the community. Many residents of Dalton believed the board was attempting to push the decision through without public scrutiny, worried that the trustees were trying to keep it out of the public eye to avoid the backlash that would inevitably follow an open decision-making process. The effects of trustee Chris Gonzalez's hasty nomination were quickly felt across the village, escalating the unrest surrounding the mayor's office. Naturally, Dalton's residents were outraged. One particularly vocal resident expressed their anger, stating, "I'm devastated that this woman came into our town and wasted all of our tax dollars." Carl, a former ally of Henyard, agreed with the community's growing frustration, asserting that the consequences of Henyard's alleged financial impropriety had reached a breaking point. The community was unified in its belief that Henyard should be removed from office. Chris Gonzalez, a trustee who had previously supported Henyard, was not fooled by her actions. Henyard's attempts to maintain control over the township during a key board meeting only fueled further dissatisfaction. During the meeting, she pushed through an important agenda item and requested backup invoices from the finance department. In July, Henyard replaced former employee Keith Freeman, who had been one of the few to expose her questionable spending practices, with loyal ally Keith Price, bypassing the board's approval. This decision was seen as a clear attempt by Henyard to strengthen her hold over the township's finances by appointing someone she could trust to oversee them. Even though no formal approval procedure was in place, Gonzalez was determined to hold Henyard accountable, pointing out that Price lacked the necessary authorization to handle sensitive financial data. Henyard tried to convince the board that Price's appointment didn't require approval, even going so far as to claim that it had already been authorized beforehand. However, as the meeting continued, it became clear that Gonzalez would not allow Henyard to exert her influence over the situation any longer. When Henyard called for a vote on the invoices, she hoped to defeat the motion, but she encountered strong resistance. Despite her best efforts, Henyard lost this round. Signaling a significant shift in the balance of power, the vote made it clear that Henyard's once loyal allies were no longer willing to support her actions. She was the only trustee to vote against the motion, while Gonzalez and Carl voted in favor of obtaining the invoices from the village's financial records. The people of Dalton eagerly awaited the results of this vote, hoping it would mark a turning point in their battle for greater accountability in their local government. Unfortunately, despite the board's victory, Henyard remained in power, and the struggle for control of Dalton continued. Henyard attempted to regain control of the situation, defending her position at every turn. But her efforts to expose her enemies and shift the blame for her financial mismanagement only further fueled the growing distrust in her leadership. Meanwhile, the support for those calling for accountability continued to grow. The tides were turning against Henyard, but it remained unclear if she could weather the storm and retain her position in a last-ditch attempt to reverse recent ordinances designed to limit her spending and improve oversight. Henyard convened a special meeting of the township board. The new regulations, which required that all costs be pre-approved, were a direct hit to Henyard's reckless spending habits. None of the 4 trustees attended the meeting, and Henyard responded forcefully, arguing that the new policies were preventing the township from providing essential services to children and senior citizens. "You think this is about stopping Tiffany Henyard," she argued. But it's really about stopping the services here in Dalton Township. Despite Henyard's impassioned plea, it was evident that the board's goal was to ensure accountability and responsible spending. The new regulations made it much more difficult for Henyard to operate without oversight. No longer able to spend freely, Henyard found herself rushing to obtain approval for a number of upcoming events, including a picnic named after her own campaign fundraising committee, Friends of Tiffany Henyard. Ironically, her extravagant spending was coming under increasing scrutiny, but she was unwilling to back down, attempting to justify her actions by asking, "Do I not still provide for you?" The board and the residents of Dalton were no longer buying into Henyard's rhetoric. The growing discontent with her leadership, the new legislation, and the increased transparency surrounding her spending practices were only amplified by Henyard's attempts to regain control. The battle for control over Dalton was far from over, and it remained uncertain whether Henyard could survive the mounting pressure and hold onto her position. The township was tense, with the future of the village hanging in the balance. Once passive residents were now actively calling for accountability and change, while the board members who had once supported Henyard were beginning to turn against her. Financial misconduct, as well as unethical behavior, put Henyard under increasing pressure, and it became clear that her political empire was on the verge of collapse. The growing chorus of voices demanding transparency and integrity in local leadership made it evident that the citizens of Dalton were prepared to fight for a better future, one where responsibility, integrity, and transparency would be the norm. The tipping point came when Henyard announced that the annual Friends of Tiffany Henyard picnic, that a community event could not take place due to the board's failure to meet and vote on it. She tried to create a sense of urgency around the matter, presenting it as a crisis. The supervisor will undoubtedly continue to make it seem like there is a crisis, Henyard warned. But if you're going to make those decisions and choose to spend money on other things instead of attending to the children, that's precisely why my political career has gone into sharp decline. Trustee Chris Gonzalez swiftly shot her down, reminding the public that the real issue was not her personal interests, but her repeated failure to prioritize the needs of the community. Gonzalez pointed out the troubling $200,000 payment to Oak Construction Company, a company with more red flags than a communist march. The payment, allegedly for roof and window replacements at senior homes, was under intense scrutiny. There was just one problem. The owner of Oak Construction had been awarded the contract after paying a Cook County assessor to lower property taxes. To make matters worse, there were no formal agreements or competitive bids for the project. Oak Construction's owner had a notorious reputation, including connections to tax fraud schemes and fake house repairs. Despite Oak Construction's dubious history, Henyard remained steadfast in her support for the company. Even though the company's owner, Alex Northeast, was facing jail time, Henyard continued to back the deal. The shady nature of the transaction only highlighted Henyard's irresponsible behavior and disregard for the well-being of Dalton's senior citizens. The public was outraged, and local leaders were beginning to connect the dots between Henyard's financial mismanagement and the deepening crisis within the township. Things grew even more complicated when federal investigators uncovered a troubling new lead in the case. Former Deputy Police Chief Lacey, a trusted ally of Henyard, was facing serious legal trouble. Lacey was charged with 9 counts of perjury, bankruptcy fraud, and making false statements, which seemed like the plot of a crime thriller. But this was no fictional account. It was a reality for the residents of Dalton. Federal authorities confirmed that Lacey's actions had played a significant role in undermining Dalton's morale, and leadership. Lacey had been one of Henyard's closest confidants, and their relationship appeared to be mutually beneficial. Despite Lacey's mounting legal problems, he remained loyal to Henyard, and it became increasingly clear that the two were working together to abuse their power. Federal investigators revealed that Henyard and Lacey had conspired to use their positions to control police raids for their personal benefit, using taxpayer money and public trust to fund their extravagant lifestyles. Lacey even went as far as divorcing his wife in an attempt to evade his debts. Federal investigators also uncovered a web of corruption involving Henyard and Lacey. They were accused of embezzling public funds, diverting money intended for community development to line their own pockets. The pattern of decision-making based on personal gain rather than public service became increasingly apparent. The more the investigation uncovered, the clearer it became that Dalton's leadership had been deeply compromised. Henyard continued to defend her actions, but as the scandals mounted, it became harder for her to maintain her position. Lacey's ongoing support of Henyard raised questions about the extent of their collaboration, and as more details emerged, the community was left in shock. The public's faith in their leaders had been shattered, and residents were forced to confront the scale of the corruption that had plagued their township. The federal investigation was far from over, and as more details came to light, Henyard and Lacey's political careers seemed increasingly doomed. The charges against them represented not just personal failings, but a gross betrayal of the public's trust. The once promising political careers of Henyard and her allies were now in freefall, with the community demanding accountability for their actions in the end. The investigation uncovered widespread corruption that had weakened the very foundations of Dalton's government. Henyard and Lacey's actions, which once seemed isolated, were part of a larger pattern of corruption that had undermined the township's ability to serve its residents. As the community began to demand reform, it became clear that restoring trust would take more than just removing a few bad actors. It would require systemic change. The saga of Henyard's fall from grace was far from over, and as federal investigators pieced together the full extent of the corruption, it became apparent that the citizens of Dalton were just beginning to fight back. With each new revelation, it was clear that the township's future would never be the same again. The community was left to pick up the pieces, struggling to rebuild and restore faith in its leadership.